Since we are talking about ecology and AI, my entire work has been trying to build these bridges between the more humanistic side and art and then emergent technologies. But speaking of ecology, at the bottom of my entire work is the idea of complexity, complex systems. How do we build for complexity, especially today? The challenges we are facing, planetary challenges at the planetary level. So always I was asking myself, how can we see built environments as true ecologies? How can we tap into that explicitly, more directly? So for me, the logical core was how we intervene. So I dedicated more than 2 decades of my work to work with generative algorithms, AI, big data, to actually open up built ecologies, design environments to things outside of just itself. To do something that I claim is the real superpower of architects, designers, which is power of open synthesis, complex synthesis, many elements coming together through the agency of design. And at this point in time, I think with all the planetary challenges, there is no time to wait. So one characteristic of my work is also, well, I've been accused in the past that I'm as being a highest resolution architect on the planet and things like that. So I always work with lots of data, with heavy models, with with high intricacy. So how do you see patterns in the sea of data? So now with the emergence of AI, a finally productive one, even though 20 years ago I said one day I will be talking to it and my building will be going up in, I don't know, Singapore or something like this, but so, or London. So now we are finally having more and more productive AI in different, at the moment we are working with maybe 9 forms of machine learning, synthesizing all these things together. So even looking at the digital workflows, it's already an ecology, or we are building it as such. Obviously, it's early days, but I think we need those kind of, for the first time in history, we have that sort of evolving other kind of cognition that is very different than ours and with which we can collaborate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I was speaking earlier with S. Devlin and we were talking about this, is how do you move on from cognitive intelligence into really considering where other minds come in? And I know this session is called Create Tech. But I just think that kind of separating that as a field is actually could be problematic because, of course, as we build technologies into the future, we're going to have to consider new ways of thinking, connecting, and building, which will not just be driven by logical formats. It's going to involve what you said is systematic, complex thinking, engaging with multiple stakeholders, particularly with a lens on ecology. So we'll come back to this later. I know there's more videos. It would be beautiful to see them, and maybe you can unpack a little bit of what we're seeing.
Well, there are just glimpses, but for instance, one of the problems, I can give you a couple of quick examples of the projects. So one of the problems is, well, of course, I think we need to build for high density, because the planet, for planetary health, we need to build at high density. So how do you build at high density and high quality? We see cities like Hong Kong or many others that struggle with, so using pattern recognition, using various forms of AI, machine learning, and data, how do we start seeing something that we were never able to see before, and then plugging it into, for instance, construction systems project that we call AI Timber. So just looking at the simple logics of connection and how that can give us with the same building blocks. So in prefab, you have all the same elements. But just changing the connection logics with AI, we can now get every moment in the building different and rich. So how can we democratize good design for everyone? That's one example that we can see here. The other one is, for instance, for large-scale infrastructures, green energy fields, such as in Australia. I looked at 60,000 abandoned mining sites, for instance, architectures of Anthropocene, you could say, how we revitalize those communities, those sites, those ecologies. So developing algorithms for site sensitivity and then developing these solar fields that actually, because they are generated with designers, intuition, and data working together. So developing a sort of beautiful patterns as if the wild plant or flower is growing to the landscape. So this becomes a new kind of nature, new kind of destination. So it's, and for me, it's incredible how these projects such as large-scale infrastructures are always devoid from design. It's only engineering aspect present, but not. So how can we work from more polymatic capacities between humans and non-humans and address more agencies in the complex sites that we're talking about?
I mean, this idea of like intuition connecting with algorithms is something that I think is going to come up more and more as we head into the future. How are we building? Who are we building for? And where are we separating human and non-human? Has become problematic, blurry, confusing, and I do think that work like yours, even though it is so complex, even in what is manifested here, is a reminder that if you bring people from outside of silos, you're an architect in so many ways in your work, and you're a technologist as well, can create more thoughtful conversations, but also will manifest, hopefully, in building new worlds. So we'll come back to that, and thank you for sharing. And I'm going to move on now to our next panelist, and maybe we can change the images to show Marzia's work. So Marzia Niccolai is the head of product management for Google Arts and Culture. She's an engineer. She is, we've been talking about creative technologists. I define you within that category. She's a creative technologist, and she has worked to build products at Google in multiple formats on multiple platforms for the last 16 years. I first met Marzia when we had first started working at the company, and you don't often meet people within these large organizations who've kind of sat across what does it mean to have an impact outside of the organization, but also how do you build better products to tell stories around culture, creativity, and to manifest new outcomes. And in your work, Marzia, you've been at the forefront of machine learning, generative AI, hybrid realities, immersive tech in a way that most people wouldn't realize from the outside. So we can talk through what we see behind us first, but it would be amazing, I think, for you to say a little bit about what you do and what your role is right now at Google.
Yeah, thank you, Suhair, and thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, I work on the Google Arts and Culture product. And for us, it's really about bringing together 3,000 collections from 90 countries so that anyone can explore and get a sense of shared humanity. So everything from the greatest artworks at museums like the Musée d'Orsay, to we have natural history collections from the Brit Research Institute in Texas. And through that, we're able to take those collections and really think about creative, engaging ways that people can explore and understand them. So we start here with one of our generative experiences. And so this is the idea that we can really build interesting, shareable tools for people to express themselves with large language models and other generative technology. As it all starts as well, I've been working on ways to digitize collections. So in order to give that access, a lot of these things are locked away in specific silos around the world, and museums need that help digitizing. So here we see something a bit different. We digitized the stained glass window, but we've digitized natural history collections, we've digitized artwork, we've digitized everything. And when we bring that together on the platform, it's really about building these interactive experiences so people can see those connections, and so they can experience, like what jewelry is like across China, across India, across France, across all the different countries in the world.
So you're building technologies both for the purposes of capturing, digitizing, and uploading, as well as for navigating, right?
I mean, I think in the end, it's all about the navigating. It's all about surfacing those shared collections. And that's why AI can really help us there, because it allows new, interesting ways of exploring. And it really allows us to connect things in dynamic and in interactive ways for our users.
How many people here have got the Google Arts and Culture app or have seen it? Well, let's just leave the lights on. It's so much better. Okay, cool. I think it's worth seeing. I mean, when you talk about AI, the one thing that I feel like most people have seen or touched on is the art selfie. And I know you worked with that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I think there, again, it's about how can we actually make exploration more intuitive and more interesting to people. And so obviously throughout art history, a lot of people have depicted humans. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if you could find your art doppelganger? And so that's where Art Selfie was born, this idea of taking a picture of yourself and looking throughout the immense collection of kind of world, art history that we have on the collectboard and finding it. And we had very interesting stories, people who found relatives or other things that had been depicted from many years ago.
I love that. Okay, so now I know you guys are doing a lot of work in the space of sustainability, climate, ecology. Obviously, we're in this complex narrative right now when we speak about AI, generative algorithms, producing carbon emissions. Most tech companies are talking about being totally data neutral, and so on. But your work doesn't, and both of you, your work doesn't necessarily engage with how to solve it, but how to engage with these issues, how to face them head on. And this is a conversation we were having earlier, is that where do we find the line, I guess all of us, many of you work in tech, to say, well, this is bad for our planet, how we can disengage, we can cancel, we can look down upon, or we can consider ways of questioning and having a conversation or manifesting work within that space. So, I'd love to hear from you, Alisa. I know you're talking about ecology a lot in your practice, the evolution of that in your work and what you're looking at right now in that space.
Yeah, well, as I said, at the core of everything I do is this idea of complex systems. And I think that's the dominant feature of ecology. You cannot engage with ecology if you don't find a way for that. But I think also what Marzia was mentioning, these platforms that allows us to to work with more distributed, decentralized systems, to build up awareness, to have this channel for building up, yes, awareness, but also a kind of emergent work that is coming to distributed community is very important.
How do you define ecology in your practice?
Well, it's just a multi-system, so not working in architecture and engineering, in our fields, you have this dominance of thinking in the past of optimization of one system, so you optimize single system that doesn't talk to any other system, and so you have a super optimized facade, but because it doesn't talk to other systems in, let's say, a building, it's even more carbon intensive and creates 20 problems. Solves one problem, but creates 20 others. So I think this kind of connective, systemic way is...
Is there an example of something you've done in the past?
Yes, so I was just talking, for instance, about these green energy fields, but we had different approaches depending, for instance, 60,000 abandoned mining sites in Australia, each one is extremely different. So not only different visually or in terms of, but also when you start looking at data and how, so deriving certain strategies that will regenerate these sites. But I would say creativity is also extremely important because we are swimming now in sea of data and choices, but this creative intuition and evolving creativity is crucial. And when I work with my students, for instance, and I've been working with generative algorithms for over 20 years, it usually takes 2-3 years with the best of them who really get interested in this to develop certain intuition of how to work with generative algorithms. But now with generative AI, at least that aspect is evolving in the human psyche much faster. We see this kind of visual pattern recognition evolves in 2-3 weeks now. And also the conceptual thinking and daring to think different ideas and even kind of imagination is even expanded. So here I see some positive, and also when I look at younger generation, they're all in, I don't know, this Fortnite and these games, and they're very much based on collaboration, collaborative models, contrasting that image of architect as a big celebrity, genius, soul figure. I think it's very important that we start engaging with this collaborative modes, and not just one, but again, polymatic knowledge, so different expertise, human and non-human, synthesizing together. I think it's how we can address ecology.
Well, as you speak, we're reminded that it's been a journey. I remember Google's Deep Dream Generator. Well, I don't know what it was even called, but it was, however many years ago, maybe 2016. can't remember. But that was, dreaming. I don't know how many people saw that. It was called Google Deep Dream, and it was just basically generating these like hallucinogenic images that were feeding off of themselves, and for no purpose other than to see it and to engage with it and to go down into a spiral of a world. And I think there's something about what you said with imagination there. Not everything has to have a purpose and give you a document or, a summary of, a letter or whatever else. It can just be for the purposes of dreaming and engaging with, human consciousness or creativity in new ways. And that's the power of what creativity, I guess, means in your practice. But Marcia, I know you guys have done a lot of work with COP, some of the various COPs, you're doing stuff with climate. I'd love to know a little bit about the work that Google Arts and Culture does in that space.
I mean, for us, one thing we really do is we engage with artists around the world so that they can bring these experiences to our platform that allow you to really visualize and understand. Because I think often you can feel very overwhelmed by the amount of information. I mean, as you say, it's like a large amount of data. And by working with artists who can make experiences that can show you very simply what microplastics are and how you can visualize them in the air, or how the jellyfish around are acidifying the ocean, and these kinds of information, and building these very immersive emotional experiences really get people to care and engage with the subject matter. So that's something we've been doing. And also working with researchers. So for, as you mentioned, COP, one of our recent projects allowed anybody to become a citizen scientist and actually to take audio samples of deep sea and to be able to understand what's happening with the life, how you can hear motors, fish, other things, and using that data that we collect to help train ML algorithms that will be able to take these audio samples and process this for research so they can really understand what's happening in the ocean.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't even know about that. And so there is a space where you're creating a bridge between technical infrastructure and creative possibilities. So with the artists, you basically provide them the resources, and do they get engineering support? How does it work?
They get creative and engineering support from Google, and we help them realize their creative vision and bring it on our platform as well. So it offers like a central space where you can explore all of these different artist experiences, as well as museum collections, as well as creative and interactive experiences.
Right. So, I mean, the conversation, are there any creative coders here or creative technologists? Not really. So, I think I saw someone. So basically, this kind of conversation around a new space of where you have coders who consider themselves to be artists or artists who work with code, that is a growing ecosystem. It has been for some time, and both of you are in spaces that nurture that kind of thinking and that kind of work. And there is something about working towards no real set outcome. The process is what brings you to an experiment at Google Arts and Culture or a speculative design project that you show here. Not everything needs to manifest in real life or in real form. And I'm curious for both of you, I mean, maybe Alisa, you can start, of how much time you actually spend in that speculative process, which you have the freedom to do because you're within a university, because you are a designer in these ways. You're not just working towards building a product. And how much these sorts of, the generative AI algorithms have helped you or hurt that process because they're speeding things up a little bit.
Well, they speed you up, but exponentially, but they also slow you down because you immerse yourself into much bigger space. And I sometimes talk about rendering invisible visible, and this kind of my research lab at UCL in London was called Wonder Lab. So this idea of which I think is a basic characteristic of discovery and innovation as well, going after this kind of awe and wonder, discovery of unknown. So I spent lots of time, 2 decades in that space, and I'm still in that space, but I'm also working on applied projects. And maybe in 2020, when there were big fires in Australia, because at the moment I'm in Australia, in Melbourne, and I started thinking how my work can help with the larger scale systems that are more consequential on a planetary scale. So then I started engaging these larger scale projects, which Unfortunately, I'm under lots of NDAs at the moment, but we are working on the actual applications in the real world as
So
well.
what is the future of cities or building? Is it going to be driven mostly by algorithms? What do you think?
No, well, I think cities are an interesting topic because cities are the most complex constructs humanity has created, yet the way we think about them, engage them, design them for sure, is not taking that into account. And this has been my, and also cities are a major contributor, the main contributor to CO2 emissions and energy consumption in the world. So we solve the cities, we basically solve the planet. However, I don't see tech industry really engaging enough with that topic. We see engagement with medicine, with some other. I encourage tech industry to engage with the built environments because it's really at the core of the planetary issues.
Why isn't it happening? I mean, I know Google had sidewalk labs for a brief moment, and that was a challenge. Why do you think it's not happening?
There are not too many. You have architects on the one side engaging with technology, but in a very rudimentary way. You have technologists trying to engage with cities and design, but without a deeper understanding of design culture and the bridge. And this is what I've been trying to do, to build that bridge between these domains and involve others in that. And also, just in terms of computational power, if you look at the number of variables, or even now we are working with generative algorithms that are image-based. If you try to go even just three-dimensional, even though I always talk about n dimensions, the computational power that you need is exponentially larger. And I myself, at the moment, am not able to compute everything I'm trying to design. So it's a really kind of computationally complex problem as well.
I do think that there's something there about the public sector and where do you create spaces for those sorts of outcomes to manifest. And you guys work only with not-for-profits, right? And I'm wondering how you see that. Like there's been a clear decision to say we'll only work with cultural institutions, museums, and not private entities to not just platform their work, but to provide the best of Google engineering talent and resources. Was that a decision that was made early on in the project? Like how did that kind of come about?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, we really want to be a centralized platform for these institutions, but we do work with artists and other members of the sector as well. And so the core platform is really about this exploration, surfacing the shared humanity, but the work of Google Arts and Culture does expand beyond that to engage with artists, other people who are working, and to bring the best of technology and culture together, and to actually just engage as part of the dialogue. Because I think for us, we want to be part of that conversation with institutions, part of the conversation with artists, and be supportive and helpful where we can.
Mm-hmm. And then you kind of often connect with real life exhibitions also, right? So you have like this augmented layer online.
Exactly. Often these exhibitions are only existing for some short amount of time, but you can capture some of that and bring it online and allow that exploration for years to come as well.
And how much did things change after the pandemic with everybody already going online, like in terms of your strategy and the things you were interested in capturing?
I think the pandemic definitely shifted it in terms of it became clear what the importance of this resource was to everybody, because we'd been at it for 9 years when the pandemic hit. And I think for a long time it was building up this audience of people who understood us as a resource. And when the pandemic came, things we had been saying in 2011 about the importance of having all this online became very clear because people were not able to get out. And doing things like capturing virtual tours of places like the Taj Mahal or places people weren't able to get to during the pandemic kept that connection with culture online. And of course, now that we're a kind of post-pandemic world, we don't expect that people are only going to stay online. So we are again looking to make sure that we surface this as a resource for people who want to learn more about culture. But it really did, bring to the forefront that not everybody is going to be able to travel all of the time, and it's a great resource and a great place for people to come.
And sort of redefining what is culture. Of course, there was art, and I know you do so much other.
I think culture is everything that we interact with. We have things around food and cuisine. We have a lot of stuff around crafts. The people who put together these puppets in India, or they put together jewelry in China. We have nature and natural history as well, which I mean, many people don't think about our cultural, but for us, it's really about the story of humanity and the story of the earth and how we experience it.
I love that because I do think it is a more recent conversation in culture is how do we showcase our planet, and there's so many, I mean, you guys work with Daisy Ginsburg on her AI and pollinator project, which was showcased at the Serpentine. And there's so many new layers of considering ecology and the environment to be part of our shared heritage and our shared culture, which wasn't the case before, considering looking for intelligence as does in trees and other species. And actually, Alisa, I wonder in your work right now, you're working on these massive new projects, how you kind of play that bridge between, how do you map environment as a stakeholder in each of these projects?
Yeah, well, we engage a lot with things like simulations, so taking data from real systems and simulating, for instance, computational physics, hydrology, things like that, and then designing within that sort of larger framework, informed ones, finding patterns in the sea of data. I started diving in Australia, so looking for that amazing creature when you are in that kind of sea of. So it's a really amazing synthesis, a large ecology of human, non-human in terms of what we are addressing, but also how we work. So it's incredibly important also that we are not just dropping some objects in that sort of, whether we are talking about urban environment or more pristine natural one. How do we actually work with things outside of ourselves?
I mean, the one challenge that I think is that what you said is unsolved is like for the world that we've already built, now what? We showcase stories, we tell stories of food and aesthetic and art, but like then where do we intervene with where it goes next? And I guess it's an unanswered question, is that how do we create spaces for considering the future? I mean, many people in this room will be doing that, but in all of the talks that I was listening to, there was such a focus on the platforms and the infrastructures that we're building off of and not the application. And actually both of your work is about how do we bring this to the world in different ways. And I think a lot more, Create Tech should be broader in that, is like who should be engaged in the actual application. And of course, we're in a big Western city. What about forests? What about indigenous cultures? And how do we tap your expertise into those areas, which is a process that also takes time, right? How long did it take to build arts and culture platform at Google?
I mean, it's an ongoing process, right?
Right.
And it's a conversation as well. I think it's making sure that everybody has a seat there and that everybody is able to join in that conversation and everybody is able to create. And that's why, things like Art Selfie, or we have other experiences like Poem Postcards. We have the ability to, make your own artwork and share and become part of that conversation. So even though our platform itself is for cultural institutions, we want to bring everybody on board and allow everybody to participate.
I love Pocket Gallery, my favorite, where you can project I mean, I don't even know if it's like cool anymore, but I love it. You just literally project in augmented reality.
I mean, that's another thing, right? We are able to imagine spaces that couldn't or won't exist. I mean, the original impetus for Pocket Gallery was the fact that, Vermeer only had something like 36 artworks. And bringing all of those artworks together in real life in a space was almost impossible, but building a virtual space for them and to allow them to be seen and experienced together in augmented reality was really powerful. And now we've built a tool so any museum can come in and build these virtual spaces, virtual collections, and you can navigate them on 3D online. So it's quite
amazing.
powerful.
I love that. So before today, I was listening actually to a talk by Kyle MacDonald, who is a coder and artist, and he was talking about limits and the limits of models. And I think that there is something about setting limits for ourselves and how we work, how we build, and the limitations that are provided by our planet. And both of your work really engages with that. And it is really powerful to remember that it is not infinite. We don't have infinite resources. And we also don't have infinite amounts of time. And so how can we slow things down and be thoughtful about that? I'm sure people have more questions. So Marcia is actually going to be doing a Q&A later if you want to join her. And you can follow along with both of their journeys, I think, online. But I really wanted to thank you both for your time and for coming here.
Thank you,
Thank
Suhair.
you for
Thank you.
Great to be part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.